So today's video is going to be the most extensive breakdown on the topic of revision on this whole entire internet. I am determined to make this a go-to source for any and all things that you are curious about when it comes to the topic of revision. We're going to talk about what revision is, how it works, why it's important, and the myriad of ways that you can apply it to your life for amazing results. I'm also going to cover the most frequently asked questions that I get so that this video can be your go-to source for everything you need to know about revision. And to make things easier for y'all, I made sure to add timestamps below so you can check the description box to see if there is a particular section or topic that you want to know more about. Otherwise, you are more than welcome to watch this whole way through because I promise you it will be worth it. By the way, hi, I'm Missy Renee, and on this channel we talk all things manifestation and the law of assumption, so if that's a topic that you want to learn more about, then definitely be sure to subscribe to my channel, hit that bell icon for notifications, and if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to hit that thumbs up button. If you're interested in any of my resources, such as my coaching programs, my workshops, and masterclasses, you can find all of that information down in the description box, so definitely be sure to check that out. So if you are subscribed to my channel or have been watching my videos for some time, you'll know that I am a huge advocate for revision. And the reason I talk so much about revision is because, number one, I truly do not believe that it is emphasized enough in how important it is, because, number two, this, more than any other technique or exercise or method, was the thing that has radically changed my life, more than anything else. And I am not the only one to agree with the sentiment. Neville Goddard also spoke extensively about revision and its importance, oftentimes telling his followers that if they were to walk away from his teachings, forgetting everything he taught except revision, if revision was the only thing that they remembered to do, that alone would be enough to radically transform their life. He would often say that the first act of correction or cure is to revise. Essentially, that this is the first step that we want to take. That if we are overlooking this or we're sleeping on revision, then we are making this practice much more difficult than it needs to be. But without further ado, let's go jump on in because there is a lot to cover. And we're going to start with the basics. What exactly is revision and why is it so damn important? In the most simple terms, revision is the act of taking a memory of an unpleasant or unwanted event and imagining that it had gone the way that you would have wanted it to go instead. So you're taking a memory, you're taking an event that happened in the past, something that was not ideal, something that you did not want to experience, and you are instead imagining that it had gone differently, that it went in a more positive way or a more desirable way instead. So for example, let's say that you got into an argument yesterday with your best friend. It got really heated, terrible things were said, but now that you've calmed down, you start feeling guilty about what was exchanged and the hurtful things that you told them. In this case, to revise it would be to imagine that instead of the argument, instead of recalling the exchange that you had and the hurtful things that were said, you would imagine that there was no argument. Perhaps it got diffused before it had a chance to turn into a full-blown fight. Perhaps you avoided the topic that set it off entirely. Either way, in this case, to revise it would be to revise the incident so that ultimately, instead of fighting, the two of you hung up the phone, laughing and carrying on as usual. And I know if you are new to this topic and you're just hearing about revision for the first time, you may be wondering how the hell this is possible and what is the point? Why is a revision so important when it comes to manifestation? To have a better understanding of the importance of revision, we need to have an understanding of our self-concept and how we go about creating our reality unconsciously, because this law is something that we are utilizing all day, every day, in every single moment. The vast majority are just not aware that we are doing this. So the law of assumption essentially just states that your beliefs and your assumptions, the things that you hold to be true for you, is what ultimately determines the 3D experience or your physical reality. It is going to determine the kind of people you meet and interact with. It's going to determine what kind of jobs you get, how much money you have. It's going to have huge impacts in every section of your life. So if I hold beliefs that are limiting to me, that do not serve me, such as people can't be trusted, I always just get abandoned, I'm never good enough, I never get the promotion at my work, I always do my best, but it's never good enough. These types of beliefs, if we resonate with these statements, if that feels true for us, then that is going to determine what we continue to experience going forward. All your beliefs and all your assumptions make up your concept of self, your self-concept, as it's called in this community. That is the sum total of what you believe and assume to be true. It's what makes you uniquely you, and all of the traits and quirks and what you identify with, your expectations, how you interpret things, how you make decisions. All of this stems from your self-concept. And your interpretations of your life are seen through the lens of your past experiences, because your beliefs and assumptions are held up by your past experiences. And we have such a strong attachment to our memories that we allow them to dictate this present moment. Every decision that we make in every moment of the day is evaluated and determined based on the past and what we have experienced in the past. We are constantly evaluating our present circumstances, contrasting them with our past experience, and using that data to gauge a probable outcome in the future. Basically, everything that we do in our day-to-day is determined by what we have experienced in our past. All day, every day, we are thinking, acting, and reacting from our core beliefs and assumptions. And these core beliefs that we hold are held up by evidence of our past. So essentially, in every moment, we are reliving our past, even if we are unaware of it. And if we think about it, if we observe it for a moment, we see how much this is true. How often do we find ourselves limited to our seemingly fixed past, recreating and re-giving life to these past events because they feel much more real to us than what we imagine? We relive our past doubts, fears, insecurities, and resentments and project those patterns back out over and over again. It may not be deliberate, but either way, whether we are conscious of it or not, when we remember something, we recreate it. So all of your current beliefs, assumptions, the concept of you, the concept of self, is being upheld by our past, by our memories. Your memories serve as evidence that only reinforces your self-concept. And I want to share a quote from Neville Goddard to really drive this point home about how important revision is in the act of conscious manifestation. Man and his past are one continuous structure. This structure contains all of the facts which have been conserved and still operate below the threshold of his surface mind. For him, it is merely history. For him, it seems unalterable, a dead and firmly fixed past. But for itself, it is living. It is part of the living age. He cannot leave behind him the mistakes of the past, for nothing disappears. Everything that has been is still in existence. The past still exists, and it gives, and still gives, its results. Man must go back in memory, seek for and destroy the causes of evil, however far back they lie. This going into the past and replaying a scene of the past in imagination as it ought to have been played the first time, I call revision. And revision results in repeal. Changing your life means changing the past. The causes of any present evil are the unrevised scenes of the past. The past and the present form the whole structure of man. They are carrying all of its contents with it. Any alteration of content will result in an alteration in the present and future. Live nobly, so that mind can store a past well worthy of recall. Should you fail to do so, remember, the first act of correction or cure is always revise. So Neville makes clear in no uncertain terms the importance of changing the past. We must go back in memory, seek and destroy all causes of evil, no matter how far back they lie, because the past and the present are one continuous structure. We cannot just leave these events behind or move on from the past as we so often do, because nothing disappears. Nothing ceases to be. So long as we hold those memories, we will hold the conceptions and beliefs around them. But even with that understanding, even when knowing how important it is to revise the past, a lot of times what people describe to me is a reluctance to do so. There's still a hesitancy there. There's still that unnerving feeling when we think about approaching revision. If you have been experiencing this, just know that that is completely normal. This aversion is due to our resistance to change. This is a defense mechanism of the ego mind, of the ego self. Change is the ego's greatest fear. And when we start to think of revising these events of the past, with that comes the knowing that aspects of ourself is going to change. In part, we are fearful that even with revising the bad things, the so-called unwanted things, we will be also revising and reconditioning good aspects of ourselves, desirable traits and characteristics. For example, even though we experienced hardships and things that were not desirable or ideal, we may think that we have grown from them, that by overcoming these hardships and these challenges has made us a stronger person. And if everything in our life was easy, wouldn't that just make us weak? And I used to think in a similar fashion. In my old way of thinking, I had made peace with a lot of the terrible events of my past because I believed that it truly made me a stronger person. Overcoming these hardships and adversaries and difficulties made me who I am today, damn it. I didn't want to change that. I liked me. Besides, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? Except that, of course, I was completely wrong in this line of thinking. In truth, I wasn't stronger, and I hadn't made peace with the terrible events of my past. In fact, a lot of those events left me traumatized to my core. I realized that these terrible events did not instill within me a sense of courage and strength. It made me incredibly fearful and scared to trust out of fear that I would be hurt again. So I revised a lot of these hardships. I revised a lot of these memories that left me with that lasting trauma, that left me terrified to trust, fearful of abandonment, fearful of rejection. And what I quickly realized is that as I continue to recondition these old events, these old memories, as I revised and imagined instead that I had much more lovely encounters, I had much more positive scenarios and circumstances, I imagined my upbringing completely different than how I had remembered it. And from that, I formed a deep confidence in myself. I felt secure. I felt assured. I felt safe. And most importantly, I truly felt stronger than ever before. I was disillusioned to think that my traumas and these terrible things that instilled a horrible sense of self-worth, I quickly realized that holding on to these old memories of pain and abuse and sacrifice was only to my own detriment. And it wasn't until I revised so many things of my past that I truly felt stronger than ever before. Know that there is likely going to be some feeling of hesitancy. There's going to be some aversion to this idea at first. It is a very bizarre concept, this idea of changing the past. But by holding on to these terrible events that did not serve us, we are only going to continue doing ourselves a disservice. So with the understanding of revision, what it is, and the importance of it, how do we apply this technique to start to change our life, to start to change our past? And the beauty of this technique is there are a plethora of ways in which we can imagine and revise the past. But for the sake of simplicity, we can kind of break this down to 3 different ways that people usually apply revision in their lives. And that is revising long-term events of the past, revising the last 24 hours, and revising on the spot or in the moment. And the first one, revising long-term memories of the past, is where the most impact is going to lie. That is taking any memories that we associate with our self-concept, our limiting beliefs, and we change it as far back as early childhood. So if I have a fear of failure, That stems from an upbringing where my parents were incredibly strict and I felt under the pressure all the time of being perfect. I can sort of see how these two things go hand in hand. So as an example, I want to recall a time in my past, in my childhood, that really sort of reinforced this. Whatever the event, whatever the occurrence, you want to imagine instead that it went in a way that was more ideal, that was more positive and in your favor. Revision in the last 24 hours is a habit that all of us should be getting into. Ideally, we want to go to bed imagining that the day went the way we would have wanted it to go. So if something terrible happened today, if you received bad news, or it just was all around crappy, then before you sleep, you want to instead imagine that the bad events turned out in your favor instead. At the very least, we want to go to bed each night, giving thanks for a perfect day. Even if it was not perfect, decide that it was so. And lastly, there is revision on the spot, which is where, as soon as we can, in that moment, we want to revise the event as it's unfolding or right after. So if I receive a call and it is terrible news or something that I do not want to hear, then either in that moment or as soon as I hang up, I am imagining that the conversation went the way that I would have wanted to instead. And what we might notice with revision on the spot is that it takes a little bit of practice. If something happens and we are triggered, it is going to be difficult for us to remember in that moment to revise it. If that's the case, that is okay. We just want to remember to do so as soon as we've calmed down and we've remembered that we want to change the outcome. We want to change what just happened there. Now let's talk about some of the most common challenges and difficulties that people encounter when they apply revision. Every single day I talk to people that have had difficulties or struggled with this, and there's really three main points of resistance that most people notice or struggle with when they try to revise. The first challenge that people describe is that when they go to revise, it feels like they're lying to themselves. It feels like they're trying to convince themselves of something different than what they actually believe. So when revising, you have that little voice in the back of the head start to go off and say that, oh no, that's not true, it didn't go down like that, it didn't happen that way, etc. And this mainly boils down to our belief that the past is fixed and cannot change. So if we remember something in a certain way, we're not going to be able to easily tell ourselves otherwise. For this, it is important to remember, here's the thing that we need to keep in mind. Revision is not about pretending something different happened or trying to convince ourselves that there was a different past outcome. We are not trying to manipulate or lie to ourselves. Instead, we are just allowing ourselves to imagine purely for the sake of what it would have been like. This comes back to the concept that creation is finished. This means that all outcomes, all scenarios, all events, all circumstances, past, present, and future, all exist and they exist right now, which means that whatever past event we encountered or recall is not actually fixed, as in we can imagine something different having happened. So we're approaching this at first like a hypothetical, asking the question, what if it had gone this way instead? How would it have been if instead of this happening, it was this other outcome? And how would that feel? How would things have been different if that were the case? So you're playing with a different reality. You're just allowing yourself to imagine it purely for the sake of the experience of it. At first, you're still going to know that the other negative event did take place. You're not trying to convince yourself otherwise. But the more that you allow yourself to entertain this hypothetical outcome, the more natural it is going to feel and the more it's going to start to resonate. Until before you know it, it's going to feel more real to you. Another common area of resistance is the emotional charge that comes with a lot of old memories. As humans, we have a natural aversion to things that are painful for us. So of course, the idea to revisit a painful past memory is not going to sound very appealing. In fact, we may be terrified that by doing so, by approaching this old memory, that we are planting the seed all over again. This is a really common area of resistance. I want to assure you right off the bat that this is not the case. If we are being deliberate in going in for the purpose of changing the past event, for revising or imagine it gone differently, then we are going to uproot that old seed and plant one that is much more desirable and fulfilling instead. It is when we recall the terrible events of the past and don't revise that we effectively reinfect ourselves or re-impress the things that we don't want. That being said, I want to encourage each and every one of you to not feel pressed to go somewhere that you are not ready to visit yet. If you went through some serious trauma and there are things that you are just not ready to face or approach just yet, that is okay. You do not have to. You might need a little bit more time for that initial emotional charge to wear down a bit. For example, if something recently happened that was very traumatizing or very reactive, then let some time pass first. Allow some of that initial charge to dampen a bit, to lessen first and foremost. And in that time, you can always practice revising other things. Perhaps things that were not as significant, things that were not so heavy and impactful on us, purely for the sake of getting familiar with the act of revision. Basically, if we are feeling like we are not ready to approach a certain area of our life, we do not have to. But we must understand that unless revised, the past is only going to continue to recreate itself. So anywhere that we can start this practice is only going to be to our benefit, which perfectly segues into the next area of resistance that people have, and that is not knowing where to begin. If you are like most people, you could have thousands, if not tens or even hundreds of thousands of undesirable events that you want to revise. You might have huge swaths of your life that are not ideal and that you want to revise. And where the hell do we begin with that? And if you are having this difficulty, if you are noticing the struggle, then my personal recommendation is that you start with just practicing revision of the last 24 hours. Before bed, just imagine the day going the way you would have wanted it to go, especially if there were any events that were not ideal. If the day was okay, then you could always imagine it to have gone better, because there's always ways in which the day could have gone better. But the point here is to just start somewhere. Start applying revision. And that way we do not have to worry about how do we begin, where do we start, what do we revise. This is going to strip away a lot of that feeling of overwhelm and a lot of the fear that can come with it. As you begin to grow more confident in your revision practice and your imaginal acts, you're going to naturally gravitate to some of the more longer-term past events as well. Another beautiful thing about revision is that we can apply it using any technique, as in you do not have to have a visualization per se. There are many different ways in which you can approach revision, be it scripting, through affirmations, through inner talking, or seeing the event in your mind's eye. There is no right or wrong technique that you can apply here, because as long as it helps you to capture the feeling of it, that is the most important thing. As always, feeling is the secret. Now, what if you know that you have memories and events that happened, but you cannot recall them? Because one of the symptoms of trauma and one of the natural defense mechanisms that we have if we've experienced trauma is the ability to forget it, not being able to consciously recall it. So what if we do if we don't remember the event, but we know that there is something there that needs to be revised? In that case, you want to remember that for revision, not only can we revise old events that happened, but we can imagine whole new events and circumstances as well. Basically, we can construct new memories as well as we can revise old ones. So even if you don't remember a particular event, but you know that something needs to be changed, you can write a whole new memory. It's very much akin to being a screenwriter, and you are the writer of your story. There are different scenes, there are different locations, there are different areas of our lives, different dialogues being played out. And if there's a scene that you do not like and you do not think fits there anymore, you can cut it entirely and you can create a whole new one in its place. So let's say, for example, that you were bullied a lot in school growing up, and maybe that did a number to your self-esteem and your self-confidence. You can revise the scenarios that you recall, but you can also plant new memories as well. You can imagine that instead you were somebody who was very popular. You had plenty of friends, that people looked up to you, that you were supported. You can imagine that you were crowned homecoming queen or king. It doesn't matter. because there are no limits to what you can imagine. But in the same way we can change memories of events that happened, we can create and insert whole new memories as well. Let yourself play, let yourself go nuts, and have fun with it. Because one of the most helpful things that you can do for yourself is start to make revision a lifestyle. Neville Goddard constantly spoke on the power of revision and boldly claimed that it will change your life. And from personal experience, I wholeheartedly agree with the sentiment. However, the reason I made this video and all my videos talking of revision is to encourage you to test it. I don't want you to just take my word for this. Don't just hear about this and learn about it and fail to apply it. Try this yourself. Play with the idea of memories and the construction of memories. We already know from psychologists and scientists that memories are malleable, that we are only recalling a story that we think happened and not the event itself. We know that memories are subject to change. So if there are things that happened that shaped you in a way that is not serving you today, revise it. Because ultimately, this practice is all about breaking free of the feedback loop of habit and belief, which is being upheld by our memories and past experiences. Every choice and decision that we make through our day-to-day stems from what we experienced in our past. And if we want to see the future different than how it is now, we first have to start with our past. For far too long, you have unknowingly been held back by the conditions of your past. It has kept you planted in a state of fear and uncertainty. Revision is the key to free ourselves from this bondage. So as we head into the last weeks of 2024, I want to encourage and challenge each and every one of you watching to revise the day every day before you go to bed. Start somewhere. Start anywhere. Just revise it. Imagine that things went the way that you would have wanted it to go instead, and watch how quickly things transform for you. Because it's when we change the past that we ultimately change the future and everything in it. So test it, try it for yourself. Do not take my word for this. You will only know when you have applied it yourself. Use the tips that I outlined in this video, and if you have any extra tips, if you have anything that has helped you with revision, add them down in the comments below. Let's help each other out. And with that said, I do hope you enjoyed today's video. I hope you found this informative and helpful. If you did like it, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you're interested in any of my other resources, I have links down below to my coaching programs, my workshops, my masterclasses, my blog, my podcast, my social links. Got a ton of great resources down in that description box, so don't forget to check that out. Also, don't forget to check out the other videos on this channel. Be sure to check out my Manifestation Fundamentals playlist. Each video is a different topic, but it all pertains how to manifest the best life ever. So until we meet next time, you guys, as always, please take care, be well, and never forget that when you revise the events of the past, you will change the events of the future in the best ways possible. Happy manifesting, guys.